I'm fine if you want to stop for a minute and ask a question. Just a bit of introduction. I'm a lecturer in data analytics here at the business school. And so I've been here in Exeter for about 2 years, just starting my third year. I teach classes on quantitative methods, business analytics, and data visualization and communication. And a lot of my research has to do with social network analysis and big data. Uh, so I'm going to present some results from a research study I did, but I kind of stopped the research study before I finished it because I felt like some of the ethical and implications from the research should probably be explored before I continued. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. I've been using OBS Studio a lot lately, so I don't need to share my screen because I have full control over everything I do. So I've set up my thing here. If you want to follow along with the slides, I've got the slides posted on my website here. The slides are on Google Docs, so you can follow along, download them as you please. There's a link to it right there. And in the meantime, I'm just going to load my slides up. I'm going to do the presenter view because I have some notes I'm going to post up on the side here. Get my old pointer going, and we'll just get started. So I'm going to be talking about the automation of middle management. So what is middle management? Well, the middle management are these fellas here that stand in between the people at the bottom that are actually producing the value, the people who are actually doing the labor, the people who are producing the service, and the owners up there at the top and the executives who have control over things and make most of the strategy. And the idea here is that a lot of the tasks that middle managers are doing nowadays are increasingly, we're able to automate them. We used to think that they were a bit beyond automation and AI, but it's reached a point now where a lot of these tasks are actually being automated, and we're seeing a bit of a crunch in organizations. As a quick example, Marshall Van Alstyne and his co-author wrote this fantastic book called Platform Revolution. I'll come back to it, but I highly recommend you watch it. I got a link down here to a YouTube presentation that Marshall did, and this is a slide from that. So he compared several different companies that were in similar industries. For instance, let's compare BMW to Uber. BMW has 116,000 employees and has a market capitalization of $53 billion, while Uber has 5,000 employees. We'll discuss that. And it has a market capitalization of $60 billion. Compare Marriott to Airbnb, both providing rooms and accommodations for travel, 17 billion to 21 billion, roughly the same size, but Marriott has 200,000 employees and Airbnb only has 3,000. Same for Walt Disney and Facebook. Facebook arguably is a media company. And then Kodak and Instagram, this is a weird comparison, but when Instagram was purchased for $1 billion, it had only 13 employees. So something here is different. The biggest taxi company in the world actually owns no cars. The biggest hotel company owns no hotels. And the biggest media company doesn't actually produce any media content. So something's changing. The dominant thesis here, and this image right here is actually a self-driving tractor. So eventually we'll get to the point where we just automate fields of food. But in the meantime, I'm arguing that organizations are actually a kind of technology, and it's really a technology that's on the verge of disruption. So the two big technologies, the two big changes that are going to happen here, one is the platform revolution, which I discussed at just a moment before, and the other one is machine learning. So we're going to see the encroachment of these two technologies on the organizational form and how it changes organizations. So I'm arguing here that organizations are a form of technology. They are a system that humans have developed over millennia to distribute resources, to allocate tasks, to decide how our goals are oriented, and they take inputs from the environment and they provide outputs, and it's just a coordination among individuals. And you can argue that the earliest form of these technologies were tribal groups, and some groups had, the technology there is, do you have a chieftain or do not have a chieftain? And eventually we've worked up to, in the 20th century, with the invention of things like matrix design and conglomerates. And these are new technologies we've developed. it's hard. I mean, it seems a little abstract to think of an organization as a technology, but it absolutely is. In some ways, it's a legal structure that we've created for organizing outputs and organizing how people get rewarded and how we distribute resources. And a disruptive technology is one that comes into a marketplace and just usurps everything that was there before it. So you have, I mean, I'm thinking of examples here, but you have the internet is probably the biggest example. When the internet became really large, it just disrupted everything. Newspapers, for instance, have died out all over the world in the advent of internet use. And what's going to happen here is we're going to see a lot of these technologies. These are technology adoption curves. And you can see how the internet use, I think the slowest one is actually like dishwashers. Where is that one? But refrigerators, cars, color TV, and these adoption curves are getting faster and faster and steeper and steeper. And that just has to do something to do with the connectedness of our society and the rate of production we achieve. But we're going to see the same thing with organizations, and we already are. If the slide before didn't convince you, I'm hoping that the rest of this will. And I'm arguing that these robots, they're coming. There isn't anything that we can really do to stop it. And so what we really need to think about is how are we going to deal with the ramifications of this transformation? So the organizations are going to be transformed. What are we looking at? What's going to happen with our society? What's going to happen with our lives? What's going to happen with our work? So before I get into some of these implications, I want to show where I came from when I started thinking about this. I did my work at, my dissertation work was done at this organization, this multinational corporation bought another multinational corporation and they merged. So they're both equivalent sized companies and one bought the other out, and they fired all the executives from one company and everyone had to move to another place and move into a new office building, and they created a new merged company. And my dissertation was focused on this question: what does it take to succeed in a merger? So you're at this company and your company gets bought out and you're thinking, all right, now I have new management I have to deal with. How do I succeed? How do I survive? So that was my dissertation focus. And so here it is, here's Standard, Luxury Inc. bought Standard Inc. and they became Luxury Standard Inc. And for 3 years, I had a tiny office down here on the bottom floor of this building. And I worked on, well, what I did was the company gave me access to 4 terabytes of email corpus data over the period of about 1.5 years. So starting when the merger first began, up until about 1.5 years after the merger began, and they said, here, see what you can find in this. And so I spent a good year just processing and cleaning email data, which is dirtier than you can possibly imagine, and try and process it into a point where I can actually do some sort of analysis with it. And then another couple of years actually analyzing the results. And I'm still working on papers and research from this, but there's a number of things we discovered when we did it. So here's a network diagram of the merger, for instance. So here's time 1, here's right when the merger started, and here's Luxury. Each dot here is a single person, and the lines between them mean that they shared emails frequently, that they sent emails or received emails from each other very often. That's what a line between 2 of these points mean. And the large points mean they shared a lot of emails, and the tiny points mean they didn't do very much. And the green dots are Luxury and the blue dots are Standard. And you can see right at the beginning here, they first started, this is about a month after the merger was ratified, and they start emailing each other quite a bit, and then they start pulling it apart. Luxury starts picking Standard apart and tearing it apart, and they start transforming the organization into the shape that Luxury had, which is all clumpy and has all these little functional divisions, where Standard is much more of a big old centralized clump, but they've ripped it apart. And our goal was to find if the position that you had in the network had any bearing on whether or not you were promoted or not, or whether or not you saw a bigger salary gain than others. And we did find plenty of results for that. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. The other thing we did is we actually collected survey data. So we actually collected 3 rounds of survey data on really common metrics that are used in consulting and all sorts of evaluation and business studies on organizations. So things like job satisfaction, like how satisfied are you with a job? So we also collected that. So now I have the email corpus, which contains content, the actual words that were sent to other people in the organization. And I have how they reported how they were feeling about their job and the organization at that time. So I can combine these 2 things. So I decided, well, let's see what happens. Let's see what we can predict. So the idea here is that a person's mental state, so your mental state at a given time, and you're taking this survey and it's asking you, I like working here, strongly disagree to strongly agree, 1 through 7. And your mental state at the time that you're asking that question, I ask you that question, and your mental state at that time will determine how you respond to that, whether or not you say strongly agree or strongly disagree. So the other thing that affects your mental state is the organizational situation. Am I really optimistic about where I am in the organization? Is my job in a good place? Do I like the people I'm working with? All this kind of stuff. And the other one is personality. So I can't really change a person's personality very much. They say you're born with it, but there's evidence to the contrary, but we're not going to talk about that. So personality and organizational situation affect your mental state, and your mental state is what's driving how you respond to the survey. But I would also argue that the emails that you get from other people, so you're sitting here in this little office, there's a whole larger organization going on, spinning around all its gears around you, and you're just in this tiny little part of it. And what you view of the organization, you largely view because of the emails you receive from others. Those blast emails from the top of the organization, all those little emails from your supervisor and colleagues, those inform what's going on in the organization to you, and that can impact your mental state. And your mental state, the way your mental state is, will also change how you write. There's plenty of evidence that suggests that we can change, if you change how people are feeling, they express themselves in different ways. So I wanted to know if in some ways I could predict how people would respond to the survey questions, which are really established measures of organizational attitudes and how people feel about their job, which predicts a lot of important outcomes. And if I could predict those job attitudes from how people express themselves in their emails. Here's some mechanical details. So I used an XGBoost model and I optimized it with Bayesian optimization, and I dichotomized the scale. We can debate that ad nauseum. The continuous scale didn't work nearly as well. So the features that I generated were from this thing called linguistic inquiry and word count, otherwise known as LIWC. And I'll show you some examples of it here in a moment. But these are features that were developed by a certain set of psychologists over many decades. And if you've ever done sentiment analysis on text before, it's very similar to that, except rather than just measuring positive and negative sentiment, we also measure things like, well, the language you're using, how masculine is it? How feminine is it? Like how many words you use that are related to masculinity or femininity? Is it future tense or past tense oriented? So we can measure all these kinds of things, these properties of somebody's expression in their email, and there's about 75 of them. And then we aggregate it in a bunch of different ways. And then we look at the received messages and we look at the sent messages. In all, there's about 740 features, something like that, that we have for each individual that we're using to predict their job attitudes. And this right here is the test AUC for predicting these various things. So the predictive quality of these models is actually pretty good. But then I think that you shouldn't trust a model unless you see how it predicts. So I recommend to students and other people to frequently use inference, interpretive machine learning. And in this case, I use SHAP, or what is it? Shapley additive procedure. I can't remember what SHAP stands for. But what it does is it's actually looking at what is the contribution of this particular variable to the prediction. So in this case, this is the most important variable for predicting this outcome, which is intention to stay. Intention to stay is I want to stay at my job. And I'm trying to measure how much people want to stay at my job. And each single point here is a single individual, a single person from this data set. And this variable that I'm using is a fun variable. It's swear words. Effectively, it's I measured what percent of the emails that you received from other people have words like fuck, damn, and shit in them, as well as others. Those are just examples. There's plenty of other swear words we can select from. It's a tool chest. But the idea here is that this cluster up here is right at 0, which means that everyone in this cluster, all these people, they received no swear words. They never received any swear words from anybody. And their intention to stay was pretty high. And you can receive a few swear words if 1 to 2%, something like 1% of your emails that you receive have swear words. It doesn't really impact your outcomes very much. But as soon as you start receiving about 1.5 to 2% of your emails, you start seeing emails from other people that have swear words in them, your intention to stay drops. So that means that you want to leave the company. You're expressing that you want to leave. So we can measure this and predict it. This is the most important variable for predicting intention to stay, is the percent of free swear words you receive from other people. The other one that predicted intent to stay, for instance, was how much you express social intentions. So you send words like mate, talk, they, things that associate with social activity. So if you send a lot of social words to other people, then you're more likely to want to stay at the organization. If you're not sending a lot of those, you're less likely to want to stay. Now I have other examples of these. I'm going to show these just one more pair. And I'm going to skip the others. So this other one here is distributive justice, and this is fairness in the organization. This is how much you feel that your pay is a fair representation of the value that you bring to the organization. And it turns out that receiving a lot of quantitative words and a lot of quantitative language makes you feel like the organization is more fair. If you don't receive a lot of quantitative language, you don't think it's very fair. And what's interesting is it contrasts here. The alternative here is that if you receive a lot of feeling words, these could either be emotional or physical kinds of feeling words, like feel, touch, there's other words in there, you're less likely to think. So I think that's interesting in that you will think that the distributive justice of the organization is better if you receive a lot of things that involve quantities. And if you get a lot of things that receive feelings and emotions, you feel that it's less fair. Distributive justice is really associated with communicating details of the numbers of how things are computed and how things are resolved. I have some other things here on effective commitment. I'm going to skip that for now. So this project, we trained these interesting models and they were working well within our organization, but I didn't know how well they generalized to other organizations. Now, this is a weird circumstance where I have survey data and I actually have email data with content. That's not a common thing to have, but I did find another researcher who had an organization with email content, and they were willing to work with me. And we wanted to see if I would take the email content and train a model, and they would take their email content and generate features in the same way. And we would try to see if the job security that I imputed at their organization correlated with certain organizational events. So the other organization, they didn't have the same outcomes I did, but we thought that they should be associated with certain kinds of outcomes. So this organization really relied on getting funding and constantly renewing contracts. So the idea here is if you're at this company and suddenly you fail to get this major bid and there's going to be layoffs, I would expect that the job security in the company would drop. You wouldn't feel so secure at your job anymore if you realize that your company wasn't getting as much money anymore. So here's the problem. I fit thousands of models, and I got some pretty good AUC on all of them. You know, up here is in the 0.7s, for instance, but I found no correlation, zero correlation between how good the model fit at my organization and how well it predicted outcomes. And we tried all sorts of outcomes. This is just one example at the other organization. It didn't generalize at all. So this, in fact, I like to call this statistically non-significant. The probability of the null hypothesis being true here, or the probability of getting a statistic given that the null hypothesis is true, is about 0.99. It was tremendous. It's horrible situation. So we're continuing on this process now. We found other researchers that were collecting email data. So now we're actually trying to go into this place where we're trying to develop a generalizable model to predict organizational outcomes by passing the model and training it iteratively between organizations and see if we can get something that will predict pretty well generally at all these organizations. And we were making progress and things were looking good. The eventual goal is to produce something like this. So a manager could just pull up on a web page and they would get an instantaneous outlook on the attitudes at their organization. Like, you don't have to walk around the organization and talk to people and ask them how you feeling about your job today. You could check your dashboard and you could see, based on how they're communicating with each other, whether or not they're actually having a good work day or not. And it would be on a day-to-day or maybe even a minute-to-minute basis. We could even do things where we start predicting how likely is this person to quit in the next month or something like that. And we started getting really accurate models for that. But I started thinking, well, okay, let's say we do that. Let's say I do that. Let's say I have a model. Let's say I have a dashboard that says, that produces, let's say it gives you alerts, right? You get notifications on your phone, your work phone, right? That says, oh, your top producer, your top salesperson, yeah, they're probably going to quit next month. And what are you going to do? Like, as a top manager, what do you do in that situation? And I started thinking, like, what kind of advice would I give this situation? And I got a little stumped. I started thinking, well, how do I advise in that? One is that what if the model, really isn't that great? I think it's really great. It works on test sets really well, but in reality, what does this really mean? And even more than that, is this something we really should be doing? Maybe we should think about the implications of like really using these kinds of analytics in organizations and the kinds of transformations it might have on worker behavior. Are people going to start, using email differently if I start saying that we use your email, we scour your Slack page, we look at how often we do linguistic analysis of the captions from your Zoom meetings? And this is telling us, we look at the images and see how often you're actively engaging in the gallery mode of a Zoom or something like that. And we start using it for doing analytics. Like, I don't know what's going to do to employee behavior. So I had a Jurassic Park moment. I said, your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could do this, they never stopped to think if they should. So I asked myself, should we be doing this? So I had to think through these implications a lot. And I had not done a whole lot of research on this whole area of privacy and what kind of behavioral impacts are done from people when you give people feedback, like up to the minute feedback. And I was really curious about this. So I decided to start doing some research. So let's think about it. The two major things, if you're going to start looking at instances of, well, let's see, violating ethical behavior in terms of privacy, look no further than our friendly Facebook, which who knows, maybe they're going to be out of Europe soon. They say, hey, if you guys don't back down, we're going to leave. Okay. Let's look at two studies. This study right here from 2012, a really fantastic study. Ethically shady. They tried to study if we could actually influence voter behavior. So they actually purposely tried to influence whether or not somebody would show up to the polls and who they might vote for. And they found that they could. They found that they could pretty reliably shape in a marginal way whether or not somebody would actually show up and vote. And then there was this other study here, which if you had Facebook around this time, you were probably a part of this study. And what they did is they randomly sorted people into different groups. And for one group, they started only showing them negative news feeds. So they would look at news feeds from their friends and they would only feed these people negative news. And another group, they would only feed them positive news. And they found that over time, those people in the negative group started typing more negatively, and the people in the positive group started typing things that were more positive. These two are examples that rather than using machines to predict behavior and attitude, they were showing that we could use machines and machine language to change people's behavior and attitude. Okay, that's a big leap. So that made me very curious. Now, these papers, there was a number of papers just published on just the ethics of these particular papers. As social scientists, which I can count myself among them, they argue over the ethics of this, but computer scientists and industry practitioners responded with sheer confusion. The practice of A/B testing is commonplace and essential to the production of algorithmically produced recommendations, which are the cornerstone of Facebook's newsfeed. It's not that it's a standard practice, it's the very foundation upon which these systems are built. So computer scientists, they were saying, well, I don't see the problem. Like, we want to configure our newsfeed to achieve our goals, and this is how we do it. But there's a huge thing in social science called consent, and that a person who's being manipulated and somehow impacted by a research study should consent and agree and understand what they're getting into when they actually do the research. I worry that Facebook and some of these studies may have influenced people's attitudes and behavior, and they could actually appreciably impact their own lifestyle and the the outcomes for their nation or their community or something like that in negative ways. So I thought, well, what if I did this in an organization? Let's just do this. Let's take those ethics and just say, yeah, we don't really care about those right now. Let's say I want to make my organization a happier place, and I don't care, damn the ethics. So you write an email to your friend Joe. You say to him, your project sucks. Now, the email goes through an email server. It goes through a central server. The central server reads every email and it says, this is not great language. And it automatically, without your consent, just changes that email to say, no, the project needs work, which is a little bit more constructive. It's not as negative, and it's less likely to drive a wedge in the relationship between these two people. Now, this has consent issues as well, but I thought, what doesn't have consent is autocomplete. And this is already, when I first pulled this, it was 2018, but it's more common now on Gmail, but it's going to be everywhere more commonly. But what if I could configure the autocomplete recommendations in such a way that it achieves a goal? I want to change the behavior. I want to make people more collaborative. I want to increase their creativity. I want them to think about new directions. I want them to like the company itself. I want to influence people's behavior, and I don't want them to know I'm doing it. And one way to do it possibly is through autocomplete. The good side on ethics here is that it gives you a choice. You get to consent on whether or not you actually want to say these things. But at the same time, it is actually shaping how you're expressing yourself. And as I've shown through previous studies in my own work, that how you express yourself influences how other people might feel and how they might behave. So, let's take a short breath. This could be a good place for one of those black slides. So that was a lot of the research I was doing and some of the outcomes. But then I thought a little bit further. Could we actually automate some of the functions in HR? Like, what is the things that organizations do? And can we somehow apply these algorithms and these methods to automate some of that process? So to start with, let's just think about some of the things that people in HR do. Here's the employee life cycle. When you first get hired to when you transition away, there's activities that HR do. Recruitment and selection, which is finding talent and selecting the right talent, interviewing, all that stuff. Onboarding has to do with getting them from a new hire to actually being a productive member of their organization. Reward and performance management, how much people should be paid, bonuses, things like that. Training and development, making sure that our employees are consistently up to the task of the job. Succession planning, so when somebody is leaving or when they retire, who's going to take over? Or if you stay here long enough and you achieve these goals, how are you going to be promoted? And transition, what could mean many things, but often it means when the person leaves the job or whether or not they would leave the job. Firing people, making them redundant, etc. So these tasks are a lot of the things that HR, that the middle management does. A lot of those things that I just described is a lot of the things that middle management is responsible for doing. So a survey that was conducted in 2019 by Deloitte asked a bunch of professionals in these fields, do you see an increased use of technology in the next 3 years or a decrease in technology? And overwhelming, we saw that a lot of these professionals expected absolutely there's going to be an increase in technology in these different ways. The biggest one is sourcing and outreach. Sourcing and outreach referred to that that recruitment and selection process. So finding talent out there in the wild. There's a lot of different potential people you could hire, but we want to find the right ones. The next one was screening. So looking through all these different CVs and finding the right one for the job, doing applications, assessment, generating offers. Like literally, can we increase the, it's sometimes really difficult. You find somebody you really want to hire. How do you craft the right offer to get them to take the job so that you're not over offering too much, right? And apparently we don't see that much of increase in technology and interviewing, but I think that if we did this survey today in the wonderful world of COVID-19, you might see this one jump up a few steps, if you know what I mean. All right, here's our little bot. Let's train him to do some automation, okay? All right, so at the descriptive level, you might see these levels. Gartner Analytics likes to talk about these different levels of analytics, but the lowest level is descriptive. And our little bot went out and looked at all the data and said, after controlling for tenure and performance, the typical leaver makes 20% less compared to stayers. And a leaver in this case is somebody who quits their job. So we're really concerned about people who leave and stay. So in this case, it's saying that leavers tend to make less money after controlling for even how long they've worked there and performance. So we're underpaying people who are doing a good job and have been here long enough. We're not rewarding them properly. Predictive analytics would say, Sarah has a chance, 97.3 chance of quitting next month. So it's taken all these things into account and it's generated a prediction. So we can do models based on that. This is where I think a lot of analytics is today, is we're working up from, well, really, if you go into organizations, they barely do any sort of analysis at all. But this is the goal right now, is this predictive analytics. And this is the kind of thing that can turn into a dashboard. But let's go a little bit further. So prescriptive analytics say, what should you do? So what kind of changes should you be making to your organization to improve its operation? So an example here might say reducing the average working hours to 41.5 from 52, so people are working too much, is likely to reduce turnover rates by 14.5% and save $140,000 per month. So this is an example here of an AI might actually make recommendations. So this is really common. Recommender systems are really common. You see them all the time if you use Netflix or Amazon or Spotify or anything like that. It gives you recommendations about what you should try next. And this is something we can apply to the organization. So it can do kind of what if analysis, like what if we reduce this? How is that going to change the outcomes in some way? And you can take all these different factors into account. Causal analytics is a place where I think that analytics is going to be moving more into. They haven't done it a lot, but it's trying to understand the causes of certain phenomena. Right now, just because you can predict something doesn't really mean you know what causes the outcome. It just means the signal is somewhere in there and we can predict an outcome, but we don't know the actual causal chain that leads to an outcome. And this one says Sarah is more likely to stay if she has her own office. So we've determined if you know the causes of something, then you'll know what levers to pull in order to have the outcome you want. Then we move up to our friend automation. You don't get reported. You don't get told what is better or what's worse. The system instead has said, I have reassigned Sarah to her new office. It knows that that's what it's going to take to keep her around, and it has just done it automatically. And it has contacted facilities, and it has told the facilities for the building to move all of her materials into the new office, and to generate a new name tag for the door, and to scrape off the old name tag and move the old person's stuff someplace else, etc. It might find that moving an office is more likely to integrate someone with a team, and so it just automatically does this. I noticed that you have created a new team for a new task, so I've moved the offices for you. So this is the kind of thing I see automation doing, and it feels a little creepy. And I think that in a lot of cases, it's going to start happening in subtle ways at first. There's going to be things that get automated. For instance, autocomplete is a form of automation. And we're going to gradually be nudged into accepting these kinds of things in our organizations. The next level above automation, I'm just hypothesizing here, is that automation already assumes some goals. So the management and the executives at the organization have told the system the kinds of things it wants to happen. It wants to improve productivity, it wants to improve profitability, things like that. But the next level above automation is goal generation, and that the AI itself could change what the goals of the organization are to facilitate a changing environment, for instance. And I haven't thought too much about that, but I assume that to be the next level. All right, so let's do a quick case on recruitment and selection, and just kind of discuss like what would happen. So what would happen for trying to find filling positions at your company? Descriptive would just be like, what are the roles that are open? What kind of departments? How many applications do we have for each position? Really dry stuff. Diagnostic or kind of causal are, what are the properties of an application that predict a speedy onboarding process? So we want people the minute they get hired to be really productive. So we want to only send offers to people that we know are going to be up and running very quickly and productive members. So predictive is, we might go through different applicants, you interview a number of people, and a predictive analytics would actually say that this person is more likely to accept the offer than the other person. And then we can ask questions of like, how likely is this person to succeed in this role, or this is all predictive kind of stuff. And then you have prescriptive. Prescriptive analytics could be a little bit more fun. It should say, how can we design a job to best suit a high quality application? So let's think about, instead of thinking about the job we need to fill, let's think about the kind of person we want to attract, right? Let's think about the kind of person I want to work at my company, and how do I craft a job to entice that person to come here? The prescriptive analytics could actually suggest language to do that, especially with generative text AIs these days. GPT-3 is the new one, right? Which I don't have a computer that can run GPT-3. You can run 2 though. So what is automation? So automation is, I have a task that I need to be completed, and we have online platforms now for gig work. The organization could just go to one of these gig work websites like Upwork or something like that, find people with necessary skills, and then just immediately assign a contract to them and give them the details. So instead of sitting here trying to find the right person for something, you say, I need this done, and the system goes out, finds someone to do it, gives them the details, and then you don't receive anything about the people that were hired or anything like that. You just receive the end result. There's where automation starts happening. I'm going to skip the transition bit here. It's just another copy. So the things that I haven't really talked about too much, this is really focusing on HR and people management, but there's other things, organizational design, which is an area that I really like. But this is like, how do you organize the company? Like, what department should be under what departments? What department should exist? Who should work with who? What kind of roles and positions should exist in the company? You could actually ask an AI to actually help you design the company yourself. Another one is mergers and acquisitions, seeing how people interact. And another one is logistics and operations, which AI is already well and truly involved in that field right now. If you have a shipping company, you absolutely are using AI or analytics in some fashion to run your shipping company. So an example of this that's already happening, so just to give you an example, there's this really fun example that happened last year right around this time, is this company HiQ won a lawsuit against LinkedIn. So what was HiQ doing? Well, they actually like filed the lawsuit against themselves, which is like a really weird thing to do, I suppose. But I think they wanted to be certain that they wanted to get ahead of the legal ramifications of the things they were doing. I think that investors were pressuring them, saying that I'm worried to invest in your company because I'm worried that you're not legally allowed to do the thing that you're doing. And so they probably filed a suit against themselves and say, hey, look, investors, we're off the hook. And that's what happened. They won. They won this victory against LinkedIn. And what they were doing is they were scraping the public profiles on LinkedIn. Now, they weren't signing into the website or anything like this. So imagine if LinkedIn was like just the public part of LinkedIn, where if you were walking around the city center and you saw just profiles of people like posted on the walls and stuff like that. It's like walking along the wall and just, tabulating all the different job postings you see or the different people you see. And HiQ was scraping everyone's profile periodically. And the thing they were doing to monetize it is they were selling it to companies to predict whether or not somebody was about to quit their job. Because it makes sense in some fashion. If you are thinking about quitting, you're going to be updating your LinkedIn page, right? You're going to be changing how you're presented to the world. And if you didn't want to quit, you'd leave it. You'd leave it to just fallow and get old. But they were allowed to continue to do that by a ruling. I don't think it hit quite the Supreme Court in the United States, but in the United States, they're allowed to do that. All right. So the next thing we should talk about is how much time we have here. Anyone know?
We have about 15 more minutes.
15 minutes. All right. So I'm going to talk about the benefits and risks here, because it's easy to see some of the risks, but I'm going to talk about a bit of the benefits first. All right, so this comes up in any case of self-driving cars. I mean, I wish I could raise hands. I'm sure all of you have seen this trolley problem if you've ever taken an AI class. Frankly, for self-driving cars, I think this is just stupid. I think it's a stupid thing to bring up when you're talking about self-driving cars, because a self-driving car shouldn't make a decision between driving into the baby carriage or driving into the old woman. It should just stop the car and not try to hit anything. It should do what a human would do in this situation, and it shouldn't be making ethical decisions. It should try not to get in an accident. It's really very simple. So I don't think the trolley example is a very good, realistic situation. The real trolley example, though, I'm going to show you what I think is the real trolley issue for self-driving cars. In the United States, in 2018, there was 37,133 motor vehicle fatalities. Almost 40,000 people died in the United States from motor vehicle accidents in 2018. It was the #1 cause of death among people who are ages 5 to 24, and #2 cause of death for ages 25 to 64. It's a terrible thing. People killing people. And in 80% of those cases, it was caused by user error. It was the driver being fatigued, distracted, drunk, something like that. It's not a fault of the machine. It's not a fault of the car. It's a fault of the person driving it. If the person driving it couldn't get drunk or couldn't get fatigued, it wouldn't have happened. So I think the true trolley problem is this, that if we keep the status quo, we're killing 40,000 people a year. If we change it over here, yeah, you know what? It's probably going to run over a few old women on occasion. That's what we're going to be dealing with. It will malfunction and do something stupid from time to time. But the net benefit is enormous. This is what the true trolley problem is in the self-driving car situation. And I think that it's somewhat similar here in organizations. Now, let me explain. So one example here is, what's his name? Look at my notes real quick. So David Plans, who is actually part of the index group here at Exeter, he's the CEO of this company called BioBeats. And what they're doing is they're actually, they're developing wearable wristbands to wear in organizations. And they're trying to match it up with like the kinds of work that you're doing in the organization to see what's causing you a lot of stress. With the goal here is to reduce the amount of stress while simultaneously improving productivity. So a lot of research shows that giving people time off and relaxed people are more productive. So we can simultaneously improve the health of our employees while also improving the outputs of the organization. And the reasons we're not doing this is the evidence isn't really clear. And a lot of people just say, well, we just need to work them harder. I need to produce more outputs. And if we have devices like this and dashboards like this and this kind of information, it'll be a lot easier to convince executives and stockholders that we need to reduce the amount of pressure that we put on our employees and give them a better work-life balance, because this will actually have better outcomes for everyone. Another one has to do with what's called bureaucratic displacement. So this is a chart for the healthcare system in the United States up through 2009. And back in the 1980s, there was a reasonable division between the number of physicians and doctors in the healthcare system and the number of administrators. But bureaucracy has taken over the healthcare system. And this, I can make the exact same chart here for the NHS. Bureaucracy has taken over universities. It's the vast majority of people who work at university are administrative and not necessarily delivering content or helping students. Well, they do help students, but they're not really involved in the task of actually doing research or education. And a lot of that is because the complexity of the environment has become so immense, and that doing all these tasks would be taken up a lot of time. So the solution for dealing with all the administrative work is to hire more administrators. But if we have a lot more of this automation and a lot more of these kind of helper AIs, we won't need nearly as many people. Or, we're not going to even fire them though. Let's just retrain them. Let's just say, okay, let's, instead of focusing so much on filling out forms, let's focus on helping people instead. So we're going to keep the same number of people we have in the organization, but we're going to deliver more services to those people and deliver better services. So another example, I love this. So this guy named Ben Weber, he developed a company already that's doing this, and he's been doing it for years already, called Humanize, where they develop these little badges that you wear, and they look at other badges, and they can record how well you're interacting with your colleagues and stuff like that. It's a little big brother, but it has some advantages. And let me explain that right now. If you're a manager in an organization, this is what the organization looks like. You're walking through a hedge maze and you can't see the maze. All right, you're standing inside of it. You can see the few people that you know, but you don't see the whole organization. It's a big, complex organization that spans the globe. All right, so you can only see this little bit. So making the best decision is very difficult. So if you could see the whole maze, then things would come out better, because you can see all the possible options that are available and you can make the right decision and navigate in the right way. So in a very similar way, Ben Weber here, he started doing this in organizations, and he found that certain people who had very average performance were helping a lot of people. They spent a lot of their time helping. They had average performance, but that's because they spent so much of their time helping other people. And he found, for instance, that some of these helpers, when people came to them with a problem, those people finished their projects 25 to 50% faster when they got help from that person. So this person who had average performance was actually a star player in their organization, but the traditional performance metrics weren't capturing it. So if we were capturing metrics like this, these network metrics, or this more AI big data metrics that we can use, we can gather. So there's some privacy concerns for sure, but in that one sense, we can incentivize collaborativeness, which was very difficult prior to that. So I was about to talk about platforms a bit, but I think I don't have a lot of time yet. So I'm just going to explain the idea of platforms. Highly recommend you check out Marshall Van Alstyne's book. His whole idea is that what's happening in the marketplace right now is the emergence of platforms. And a really great example of that is Uber. So I wish I could do hands. So whoever's taken an Uber or a ride sharing service, the idea is that you are a consumer, you are looking for a ride, and there's somebody out there with a car with an empty seat in it, and they're a producer, they can match it up. So the platform is the system that does the matching. And what's actually happening here, so Upwork is an example for talent matching, but Uber is an interesting company. They are a platform, and they have, if you look at the number of paychecks they have about 2.25 million people in 2018, which is when I pulled this. But they've completely replaced middle management with software. So the middle management task would be who gets hired. So who gets hired by Uber? If you want to become an Uber driver, you never talk to an individual. You never talk to a person to become an Uber driver. An algorithm is assessing whether or not you deserve to be an Uber driver. When you become an Uber driver, who gets this task? Who gets assigned to this ride? Who gets assigned to this ride? That's entirely designed by software. The software decides who gets this person or not. The software fires people. It looks at ratings and things like that, and it says, okay, you're no longer allowed to drive with our platform. And it pays people as well. So this is the thing. Uber has completely replaced middle management with software. If you drive for Uber, your boss is an algorithm. So that brings me to this idea of a self-driving organization or a fully autonomous organization. There are boards, for instance. There's entire boards, well, not entire boards, but there's a board, for instance, in Hong Kong for a venture capitalist firm that one of the board members is actually an AI, and they allow this AI to have a voting share on the board when they make decisions. And their argument for this is very similar to the argument I made before about Ben Weber and performance reviews, is that you have high dimensional problems. You have situations where a human being can't possibly imagine all the different variables that go into something. And so you let the AI vote on things. Where are we with time? 16, we have just a few minutes. There's some examples out there right now. I recommend checking out Devin Fiddler's talk right here. He has a great talk about self-driving organizations. There's an example here where this will automatically generate a website for you in 5 minutes. And what's the interesting part about this system here is that it will automatically evolve the website. So as people use the website in different ways, it will automatically adjust the style and design of the website to adjust to the way, this is a company called B12, and it will automatically adjust the website in response to how people use it. As usual, I left the ethical concerns for the end, and it might get cut. The biggest one, of course, is privacy. And I've had a lot of thoughts about, like, why should I be concerned about privacy? And it seems like an interesting thing. Like, it seems intuitive. It's like, why shouldn't you murder people? Like, obviously, you shouldn't murder people. But it's the same thing. Like, why should I be concerned about my privacy? Well, you know, humans have a right to how they express themselves. So I have a right for how I get to be expressed to the world. So my conversations that I have with my friends and family shouldn't be used in making decisions about whether or not I should be employed at the company, for instance. And so that's kind of, I get to decide how I present myself to various groups. And that's no longer really the case anymore. Another huge issue is bias, and that using the past to predict the future is definitely a form of bias. And one example was that Amazon was using an AI for doing recruiting, and they found that it was biased against women. And that is primarily because all the past instances of successful engineers at Amazon were men. So it was using the past to predict the future. And it didn't even have to explicitly code for men or women. Gender isn't even like a feature in their data set. But men and women differ in the kinds of things they like, the kinds of education they have, the kinds of employment history they have. And so one of the nodes on that network would eventually code for the feature of man-woman, even if you don't mean it too explicitly. All right, I was going to talk about jobs, but the biggest thing I want to talk about here is one of the things that's at risk is if your job that involves something that's really highly dimensional. We talk a lot about things that are repetitive and labor intensive and narrowly skilled. Those are obvious things, but I would like to add to this thing of high dimensional choices. So if you're doing decision making that involves a lot of variables, in order to make a proper decision on this element here, on this proper decision, you have to consider a wide range of things. This is a case where an AI is definitely going to do a better job than you. All right. So I think what's going to happen in the future, though, is not going to be complete job replacement, but we're going to live alongside these things. So the AI is going to provide recommendations. So it's not going to replace choosing people to hire. It's going to give us recommendations. It's going to say, I prescribe that, you know, these are some of the top applicants. These are the people most likely to interview really well. These are the people we should work with. This is an example of cobots. So if you're going to live alongside robots, they can't knock you over and kill you. So it's designing robots that can actually, like, you can work alongside without danger and risk to self. Here's my summary. Organizations are quickly transforming. New technologies have the ability to accomplish tasks previously thought beyond automation. There's a lot of great benefits to efficiency and effectiveness. There are risks in terms of privacy bias and job loss. But I think right now we need to be just continually having these conversations and really assessing where the research is and what the implications are going to be. Rather than just charging forward and developing new technology, we need to stop and pause from time to time and think about what the implications are going to be. All right, thanks guys.
Thank you, Jesse. That was amazing.
That was really good.
That was really good talk. Thank you very much. I'm sorry we had to cut off or speed through the end bits.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would ask people to clap. That's probably a bit
That's how you get
annoying.
clapping organized.
Clapping at the end of talks is one of the best parts.
If anyone has questions, feel free to put them in the chat or put your hand up
And then ask them.
and go ask them exactly. Did you want to ask one of your questions?
Yeah. Well, okay, I'll ask them. So you're talking about having like a self-driving middle management sort of thing, like was it Uber?
Yeah.
Or yeah. Do you think so? For Uber, it's a bit different because everything's done across the app, and people have to sign up to work there. They've basically got all the information completely ready, right in front of you. You don't have to do any extra steps. Do you think one of the reasons why sort of like having complete computer-controlled middle management is because in many other companies it's harder to get that data and less ethical to get it? Is that, do you think that's why it's not implemented in more places?
I think that the disruption just hasn't happened yet. So I don't think it's because that data is not there. I think it's going to happen. Just like the example I had with Upwork, for instance, is a place where people of all different skills are this is just, there's several sites out there just like this, but it's essentially a platform like Uber, where if you sign up for this and you have a certain set of skills and you can say, you know, for Uber, there's different levels of Uber, right? You have the really luxurious version, or you have the ride sharing version, that kind of thing. That's you applying your different skills and where your working area is. Here's the same thing. You can say, I'm a really good writer. So if I need someone to write an article on a particular topic, I can just go into Upwork and have it, I can get on like my app and I can be like, instead of like, I need a ride to a certain place, I can say, I need an article about blah, blah, blah. And then it'll say, oh, the writer has been found for you. And, you know, then you get in the car means you contact them and say, well, I need it to say this. And then you put your phone down and wait a couple days or a few hours, and then bing, you're going to get your article ready for you. So I think it's just because it hasn't caught up yet. I don't think it's because these kinds of things are fundamentally different. I think it's just that the technology hasn't caught up. The companies that could do this kind of thing haven't created the platform yet that's really comparable.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. We have another question from Owen. Do you think being managed by AI will be accepted as a social norm eventually?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think we're going to see it as an AI. It's not like you're going to be saying, you know, HAL from 2001 or something like that. It's not going to be like you feel like this robot is telling you what to do. It's going to be more like it's going to be like a platform. Like, I've been matched with this other person. This person matched me. I do think it's going to be more and more accepted. So that's what's already happening with the gig economy. So the gig economy is just growing. And one of the, I didn't get into this, but a big part of organizational theory is what is an organization? Why do we have organizations in the first place? And one of the reasons we have organizations in the first place is because there's transaction costs, right? So finding someone to do work for you is a lot of work. It's very expensive to find someone to do a task, negotiate a price, evaluate the output, continue a relationship. That has a lot of costs associated with doing that. So if all of work was all done in a marketplace in which we were constantly exchanging individually for doing work, it would be very, very expensive. Organizations reduce the costs there. So I need tasks, but I've already negotiated how much your time is worth for me. I know what your work output is, and I'm just going to give you this task because we've already negotiated all these things. The costs are much lower. So an organization makes that cost really low. That's one of the things that organizations do. But gig work and the way platforms work is they take a lot of that cost away. So a lot of the cost gains that we got from having an organization are equivalent now. So now we can operate in a marketplace for the same price or possibly even lower than what an organization had. So I actually think that these kinds of things are going to become more common as the technology improves. and the trust in the technology improves as well. So I think it is going to be become a social norm, primarily because it's just going to become more common. It's going to be a place where somebody loses their job, right? So you lose your job and it's difficult to find work, but I can find work really quickly if I go through a gig work website. So you're almost thankful for the ability to go through one of these sites and find work.
Thank you.
What it,
Yeah. So we got another question from Archie. And let us know if you run out of time, because we originally...
I'm fine. I think I got a wife cooking dinner. I'm good.
Beautiful.
It's pizza night, dude.
Sounds
so she's
good.
making, the kids are downstairs wrestling. I can hear them. I don't know if
Cool.
so
Archie,
it's a movie night. So let's
nice.
see here. Archie asked,
yeah.
let's see, do you think said older firms would be able to transform and become fully automated? No, I don't. I think transformation is really difficult. Change is very, very difficult. You're going to have to negotiate with really well entrenched social structures and behavioral patterns that are not going to want to give up. A lot of people don't want to change the way they've done things. I think the only way you're going to see change, you're going to see disruption. You're going to see new companies emerge and overtake the marketplace and push the other ones out. So I don't really see that. They might automate some functions, like I said, like hiring or something like that. They're going to automate in places where they can, but it's not, they're not going to be fully autonomous. That's not what I expect is going to happen.
All right, thank you. We got Zane wants to ask a question. I'm gonna, he hasn't let us know.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, all right.
Hi, Zane.
Cool.
Hi, you're right. Yeah, I've got two, if that's all right.
Huh?
So my first one is that, so as automation becomes, increasingly used in middle management, HR, things like that, as everyone works from home, and it's been proven kind of that you don't need the office anymore. Both my parents now work from home, and they're not even letting them back into the office anymore.
Yep.
And of course, and there's been studies as well that it's been, some people found it more productive. So what would you think the application of this automation for HR would be now that everyone's at home?
Well, the implication of that could be really far reaching. So it's really multifaceted. So a number of things that's going to probably happen is that location is less important now. I think what's probably going to be more important is time zone. So what time zone you actually want to work in is going to be more important than where you work. And so when I seek out people to fill a particular task, where they live isn't really important. It's where how well I can collaborate with you. So that has a lot to do with like when you're awake and when you're active might be really important. So that's going to be the automation process there. There's, I don't know what the consequences are going to be there. I think that's the only thing that's really going to change is like the criteria for selecting individuals to be part of the organization are going to change. So that also means that you as an individual, you're competing in a wider marketplace. So you're no longer competing with like the local people in your town or city or region. You're competing with people globally. If people are willing to work in a particular time zone and they communicate in the way that you need them to communicate, then they can work at your organization. That's all that it takes. I don't know what's going to happen legally. Like, I don't know. Are we all going to get paid in cryptocurrency eventually? I'm not really sure what's going to happen there.
Would that be feasible though? If you have a whole project, a team of people working in the UK, and then say, you have someone working in States. I know that happens all the time, but
yeah,
but if if it's for us, we've got someone in Jakarta, they were there, so there's a big time difference. So from 1 p.m. if we've got stuff to do 1 p.m.
So
then
it's hard. So I have a meeting with there's this university in Korea that I collaborate with, and I have a meeting every Monday with them. Not every Monday, every other Monday at 11 p.m. So I meet with them and work on projects with them between 11 and midnight. And that's also because for them, it's like 7 a.m., I think. And then my other collaborator is in Kentucky in the United States. And for him, it's like 3 p.m. or something like that. So that's the only time we could find to meet, is when it was 11 p.m. for me, 7 a.m. for them in Korea, and 3 p.m. for them in Kentucky. And we get on and we meet every couple weeks. And is it feasible? You know, I'm not entirely sure. So I normally go to bed, you know, roughly at 11 p.m. And if I'm up late working and my mind is like churning, it's really hard for me to go to sleep. And that really affects my sleep patterns for the rest of the week. It's not good for me. It's not healthy for me to do that. And I've talked to them about that, that I'm not sure if I can continue that. So I agree, there's definitely some limitations, and that generally people are going to have to live within the fact that we're human beings. We're animals. We have circadian rhythms, and we live and die by the sunlight that comes up and goes down. And I don't think we can escape that. I think what's going to largely happen is a migration. So we're going to start migrating to cheaper places to live. And, you know, you see a cheaper place to live, and the biggest criteria for whether or not you're going to live there is how good the internet is. So I absolutely, like right now, I really want to move to upstate New York, where I can buy 7 acres for $100,000. That would be fantastic, as long as the internet's good. And I'll have goats. I'm going to have goats and sunflowers, and I'm play my ukulele, and then go to my home office, which is a tiny little building, and it's made just for me, and work on the internet every day. That's a dream. But I think that you're going to have a race to the bottom in that sense. So you're going to have people who you don't want to. I don't want to pay the salaries necessary for somebody to work in San Francisco or London anymore. All right, I can pay someone much less, and in order for them to work for my company, they now are going to have to move to a place that costs less. So I think you might actually see this redistribution of people slowly. It's going to happen slowly for sure, but I do see that happening. But is it going to be feasible for time zones? I've experienced it, and it's tough. It's really hard. Time zone compatibility is going to have to be something that's going to be considered.
Yeah, I've got another one. I've got so many more questions about what you just said, but I'll just get to this other question.
Yeah.
I know we're limited on time. So you've seen how effectively you can change behavior in politics, shown by Cambridge Analytics, and so from time to time they've also what's he said? Yeah, so from the campaigns they've managed in both developed and developing countries. So do you think it's possible to change the behavior of employees to make them more productive, rather than having algorithms that just predict whether they're going to quit or not?
Mm-hmm. Oh, what's the question?
So do you think it's possible to change the behavior of employees to make them more productive?
Absolutely. Yep. So, I mean, one of the things we can do is, even on like a personal basis, so I'm not even going to be changing the text that you have, but it might be that I discover certain team compositions are more productive than others. So certain people, when they work together, they produce better outputs. When people interact with this one person, they love the company. So I find out that this one guy, he's driving all the love for the company. Everyone wants to work with that guy. And so what I do is I give that guy very little actual like bureaucratic work, and his sole job is to show up to meetings and make people happy. And analytics can show you that. They can show the team compositions. They can show activity. So, I mean, I could be scanning right now, like if Zoom is doing this, I can be scanning all the cameras that people have right now and seeing how often that they're really engaged and eyes are pointed at the camera. And I can see how often they're smiling. I can record the intensity and emotionality of the voice that's happening. And I can use this as kind of like an outcome or predictive measure for saying, was this meeting productive? What was the topic of this meeting? Who was involved in this meeting? What was the task? And I can use that for reconfiguring teams, and I can do it for reconfiguring the kinds of tasks that are taking place, and I can reconfigure like time zones. I have a global community. I group people in different ways to make sure that they're all productive at the right times. And then if I manage their health, I have some metrics of their sleep patterns and their attitudes on just their lifestyle and their life satisfaction, and I can optimize that as well. I don't see any reason we can't. There's lots of levers to pull, right? So there's lots of things I can configure in an organization. And the question is, what are the right levers to pull in order to get the kinds of outcomes I want? And I definitely think that analytics can be applied to do that.
Oh, cool. Thanks for that.
All right, thank you, Zane, for the question. Yeah, looking. So we got a question from Charlie. When AI gives recommendations, can we always find out how the AI makes its decision, or do we have to just trust that it's made the right decision for us?
So that's a fantastic question. So that's a huge area of research in AI and machine learning right now, is interpretable machine learning. And it's just something that needs to be continued. So one good example I saw was there's an AI company that found, or when they worked with clients that in finance specifically, that they weren't allowed to use the system unless they could explain how the system made its decisions, because you have compliance and regulation, right? So if I refuse to give a person a loan, it can't be because of their ethnic origin, for instance. But in AI, even though it's not specifically coding for ethnic origin, it could be targeting certain groups more than others. So understanding how it's making a decision isn't necessarily a nice to have thing. It's like a regulatory necessity in a lot of those cases. And so we can't really apply AI in certain situations unless we know that it's making decisions that are fair and legal. And there's methods that we're developing for that. I don't think that this is a result that's going to, I don't think that's going to hinder it forever. I think that, well, I don't want to get too deep in philosophy, but I don't think there's anything fundamentally different about human cognition and the way humans think and consciousness that is fundamentally different from the way a software program could generate decisions as well. So there's nothing limiting us in developing systems that operate on a very human level. And so I see that becoming an eventuality. But it is something that we have to consider, is we have to know how things are making their decisions. Otherwise, one, we have to trust them. That's why one of the things I showed, I mean, back here, way at the beginning, the paper for this one paper called LIME, L-I-M-E, which is another interpretable framework for doing local imputation of machine learning expectation. I can't remember what it stands for, but the title of the paper was, "Can I Trust You?" And one of the things that I think is necessary is once you train a model to predict an outcome, you need to ask that model questions. You need to ask, okay, what happens if I give you this guy? Okay, let's say everything about this person is exactly the same, but I'm going to make him 20 years older. Now what is it? Now what's the outcome? And you need to be progressively asking all those questions and really querying the model deeply. Once you have one that predicts things well, you have to pound it. You have to just ask it all sorts of questions. And that's one of the things that SHAP does. So one of the things that SHAP does is it really queries the model to see how it arrives at its answers. And if you haven't used SHAP in machine learning yet, it's really fun, actually. Highly recommended.
All right, Zane, do you have another burning question?
If I do, we might be talking for another 2 hours. So,
well, we can at least plant the bug, and then for the rest of the night, I won't sleep. That sounds good. Let's do that.
I was actually going to ask if you were interested in just sort of sitting down and having a talk about all this stuff at some point.
Yeah, dude, I love this stuff. Be happy.
Honestly, I have so many questions, so many things to talk about now. It's been such a good talk.
Yeah, this is an area that I'm very much interested in, and yeah, if you've noticed from the excitement here, this is a lifestyle choice. I think if I wasn't a lecturer here, I'd still be doing this. I don't know. It's like if somebody says if you had $100 million, like what would you do? And I'd be operating very close to this. I mean, I wouldn't retire and stay away. I'd be directly trying to influence the way that organizations and governments operate, and try and imply some of these things to help improve. My goal would try to show that health and well-being is critical to productivity. And I would try to really be engaged in systems that really promote that kind of thing. So yeah, I love that. That's a great idea. I'd love to have just, what do they call that? It's not like a seminar or anything like that. It's like a colloquium. I can't remember what you call it. Yeah, round table. We'll call it that.
Round table, yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Awesome. That's awesome mindset to have, actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
it's really great. Thanks for the invite. You guys are a really cool group. Any group that comes together and actively organizes around an idea without pressures from the outside, it really shows a lot. It shows a lot of interest and a lot of engagement. And I really thank you for the invite.
It's all that
Thank
man
you.
sitting on the left. It's all him.
Is that left right there? I'm looking at you. Thanks a lot, man.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah.
So so you said that it's going to be more disruption of industries to automate because it's going to be so different that older companies won't be able to adapt to the change. Which industry do you think will this apply the most, the soonest?
Well, this is it's hard to predict that, like specific industries, because it has to do with a lot of factors. For instance, I feel like ride sharing was a low hanging fruit. So the question here is like, what's another low hanging fruit? So a lot of what's happening, I would say creative departments. So any sort of creative operation. So developing music, developing art, writing and stuff like that. I don't think you're going to see dominant organizations that are entirely dedicated to that. I think it's going to be entirely gig work very soon here. That's something that's really easy to produce as gigs, because artwork, it doesn't have to be as terribly specific, right? In producing parts. Another thing that's really hard to do, that will be hard to do, is anything that involves manufacturing. But I think that that's not far off. If we look at, I think 3D printing technology is going to become it. We've talked about this for a while. A lot of people have, but it is going to become more common. I think it's just inevitable. The technology is going to get better to the point where you can print things. And even if you won't have it in your home, there's going to be facilities all over the place. So if you want to order a product, it doesn't get shipped to you. You order it and then it gets printed and manufactured at a local thing, and hell, maybe even a drone like flies it to your house. I'm not sure what's the thing that's most susceptible. Well, I'm going to say the creative industry is something that's really, really susceptible right now.
Yeah, makes sense. I also thought maybe the whole marketing bit. Like, I mean, we do marketing for the society as well, but that could totally be done. Also, like, then you would already do the best way you can reach your customers and make the most engaging content.
Yeah,
I think
and
something where you can totally learn from the experience.
Another field that probably will hardly exist as run by humans is finance. This sounds a little striking, but it's already kind of happening. And that the vast majority of not the vast majority, but it's almost the majority of shares these days are traded algorithmically. And that's just going to accelerate. I think there's going to be a point where like shifting capital around in markets is going to be driven largely by algorithms, because if you look in something, so in biology, they have this term called evolutionarily stable strategy. And an evolutionarily stable strategy is a strategy that's developed by an organism or a population of organisms that absolutely wipes out the competition. It's just far better and more efficient than anything else. So developing sight, for instance, the first single-celled organism that developed little organelles for detecting light had a huge advantage over any other single-celled organism because it could detect whether or not there's something nearby. And that gave it a huge advantage. And that's what's going to happen here. So you're going to have organizations that are going to implement a certain technology. And now that's the only way you can do this process. If you do it the other process, it's like trying to, bake bread. You're trying to compete with this massive bakery, but you have a wood-fired stove or something like that. There's a niche place for that kind of thing. Those kinds of things still exist. Blacksmiths are still around, but generally, there's just another strategy now which completely usurps the entire economy, and that's what's going to happen. It's going to be piece by piece. You're going to see this thing gets automated and it becomes the dominant form, and then another thing gets automated, and eventually piece by piece the roles and tasks that people do in organizations are just going to be automated bit by bit.
Well, that'd just
Right.
destroy the job market eventually.
Yeah.
Well,
Even with
again,
self-driving cars and things like that as well.
so let's imagine my favorite example is a self-driving school bus. So in the UK, they don't really have school buses. In the United States, though, and you are certainly aware of school buses because American culture is so freaking dominant. But you're aware of school buses. So there's a bus driver that drives students to school. But if we have a self-driving bus, what's the point of a bus driver? Well, one of the things you miss out on is that the bus driver doesn't just drive the bus. They're also in charge of the students, right? So if there's conflicts on the bus, if there's any kind of worries or health issues on the bus with the other students, they take care of that as well. So they have this other role. But that role is highly, highly minimized because it takes so much attention to drive the bus. But we're not going to fire our bus drivers if we have self-driving buses. Instead, the bus driver will be helping the students. So same thing with like the healthcare industry. Like I said, like there's a huge number of administrators. It would be so much better if you didn't have to wait in the emergency room for 3 hours, 4 hours. You can immediately be seen by a nurse, because all of the processes and bureaucracy is being handled by, bots in some fashion. So all these administrators, I guarantee they don't want to be filling out forms all day. Well, some people actually like it, I'm going to have to admit. But there's a lot of people that don't, and they much prefer to be working with people and helping people instead. I think that it's just going to reshape jobs. I don't think they're necessarily all going to go away. But at the same time, there is going to be a loss. I think that what's going to happen is the rate of job loss is there's this term in Austrian economics called creative destruction, and it happens throughout all time, all economics history, that a new technology comes in, it destroys new jobs, but then it creates new niches that didn't exist before. But I think that the rate of job destruction is going to exceed the rate of new job creation, to the point that we're destroying jobs faster than we're creating them. And I definitely think that's going to happen. But I think that we just have to rethink what work is. So if you're taking care of an elderly parent, that's work. You're contributing to society, and you should be compensated for that. If you have to take care of children and stay home and take care of children, that's work. That's something that our society should value, and we should be helping them do that. So I think that there's a lot of things. We just need to structure our society in a way that accepts that, and we need to value things that really contribute to everyone as being actual work that we should value, and not just creating widgets, right? There should be things that we value that isn't just creating widgets. And I think that requires just a really rewiring of the way that we think about work and what really contributes.
Thank you. We got another question from Archie. Archie, can you unmute yourself? Cool. All right.
Here, first of all, what you just said, Jesse, that's opens a whole nother conversation that I don't think we really should be talking about on here. But my question is, you mentioned that Uber is like the first use case of this, or it's one of the first big use cases.
It's an obvious use case. I would say
it's an obvious use case.
Yeah.
Do you see more use cases on the scale of Uber happening, or do you see much more localized niche use cases?
Again, let's see. Yeah, I have difficulty predicting the future here. There are certain things that are easy to predict, and that's like trends. But saying the specific form that it's going to take is difficult to say. So let me put it this way. There's this really interesting book by a former editor for the magazine Wired, and he calls it The Inevitables. And it's a really interesting book that talks about 7 different technologies that he says are inevitable. Like they are going to take over society in some way, but the exact form they take, we don't know. It's like the internet, for instance. The internet, the minute somebody took one computer and connected it to another computer, the internet was inevitable. It was going to happen. There was nothing in the history that was going to stop the internet from being a thing. Now, the exact form it takes, we don't know. Like it could have been much more locked down and less free place. It could have been much more controlled. There's different ways the internet could have realized itself, but the fact of having a global network of interacting computers, that was inevitable. That was going to happen. Okay, so the idea of applying platforms and machine learning to all these different tasks in terms of sourcing and finding talent and reconfiguring the things that an organization does. And like an organization, you know, it has a goal. So you form an organization to do a particular thing, and you rally the resources of the individuals and skills and other things that are out there, and you produce an output with the organization. That's what an organization does. And it's just that in order to accomplish building a building, in order to accomplish, you know, reducing teen pregnancy or something like that, you form an organization because that's an effective way of achieving your goal. But even now we've seen that, let's say reducing teen pregnancy, right? You form an organization to do that, or you form an organization, Exeter AI, right? You want to form this group. Sourcing and finding members for this group, advertising it in some fashion. Like, it's inevitable that people are going to start using tools that are available to them. You're going to use social media because it's the easiest and most effective way of reaching people and collaborating. It's just these kinds of things are going to be inevitable, but I can't really say particularly which organization is going to be next. You know, there's other ride-sharing companies out there. Lyft, for example. Exeter has one because they don't have Lyft or Uber, but I forget what it's called. Sort of the Cube, I think.
Ola Cabs, I think.
Right.
And Uber, they have Uber now too.
Do they?
It made it play. Yeah.
Yeah. So my point there is that I think that there's a lot of companies doing stuff in this space. For instance, for the automated website generation. Oh, excuse me. That's not the only company doing that. And it's just, there's just a matter of historical consequences that lead to one company being successful and another one not being successful. The leadership, the you know, the conditions in which it starts. I mean, a lot of these companies will try and do a startup and they'll just fail. They'll try and promote their idea and they won't get enough funding in order to get the capital necessary in order to start it. Even though it's an idea that if they had the capital and if they were in the right condition and they started at the right time, it would have taken over the planet. But it's just, you know, the historical consequences of when it started, it didn't happen. But all I'm saying is that I can't predict what particular fields will happen to. I can just say that this is just going to be, it's Daniel Dennett is a philosopher. He likes to call these things like universal acid. It's something that dissolves everything. Anything that touches it, it dissolves it. And AI and platforms, they're dissolving all these different tasks and roles in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, it's definitely going to make a huge change. And
well, I actually need to call it now.
Do you?
My
Okay.
wife is asking me what I want on my pizza, but I want to make my pizza. So I'm going to go do that, you guys. It's been an absolute blast.
Same for us. Thank you very much.
And keep in contact.
We will do.
Yeah.
We will do. Enjoy your pizza.
Awesome, Jesse. Right, thank you.
See you later.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
so much. Bye. Bye.